I felt the weight of her victory hanging in the air before she even said a word. The lawyer's office smelled of leather and regret as my sister rose from her chair, documents clutched to her chest like she'd won a war that began the day I was born. Her smile was the kind that cut, precise and practiced. "Dad knew who deserved it," she said, her voice syrup thick with satisfaction. "Some of us stayed, some of us ran." I remained seated, fingers pressed against my knees to keep them from trembling. The inheritance, everything our father had built over 73 years of careful living, was now hers. The house where I'd traced my childhood dreams along the ceiling cracks. The business I'd watched him nurture through recessions and recoveries. Even the photo albums filled with moments I thought belonged to all of us. Before we continue, drop a comment. Where are you watching this from and what time is it there? I'd love to know how far this story is reaching. What Ellen meant by ran was that I left Mapleton after 12 years of trying to hold our family together with bare hands. I left when Mom died and Dad disappeared into grief so deep that he stopped seeing me across the dinner table. I left when Ellen's resentment crawled into every conversation like poison ivy. I left because staying meant watching my father look at me with disappointment so palpable it made my skin burn. "You always had a choice, Sarah," Ellen said now, gathering her designer purse, a Christmas gift from Dad last year, and smoothing her black dress. The dress she wore to his funeral 3 days ago. "You chose to walk away. I chose responsibility." The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, a man who had known our family since before I was born, kept his eyes down, straightening papers that were already aligned. His discomfort was audible in the clearing of his throat, in the way he adjusted his glasses repeatedly. "Miss Connolly," he said, addressing me by my maiden name, though I'd been divorced for 6 years. "If there's anything else you need—" "There isn't," Ellen cut in, as though she'd been appointed to speak for me, too. "Sarah was just leaving, weren't you?" I looked at my sister then, really looked at her. The lines around her mouth weren't there 10 years ago when I left. Her eyes, the same hazel as mine, had hardened into something impenetrable. We shared the same stubborn chin, the same slightly crooked front tooth. But somewhere along the way, we'd become strangers bound only by blood and bitterness. "Congratulations," I said quietly, standing up. "You got what you always wanted." She didn't flinch, didn't blink. What I deserved. I walked out of that office into October sunshine that felt obscene against my skin. My rental car waited in the parking lot, a simple sedan that would take me back to the airport tomorrow, back to my one-bedroom apartment in Boston and my job editing technical manuals, back to the life I'd built without their approval or assistance. I was 37 years old, and for 20 of those years, I'd been measuring myself against Ellen's perfection and coming up short. I'd been the daughter who got pregnant at 17, who married too young and too carelessly, the one who lost the scholarship, the one who dropped out of college, the one who divorced with nothing to show for it but a spine finally straight enough to walk away. I remember the night before I left Mapleton. Dad found me packing, moonlight spilling across my childhood bed where I'd laid out my meager belongings. "Is this how you solve problems, Sarah? Running away?" His voice wasn't angry. That would have been easier to bear. It was weighted with disappointment, heavy as stone. "I'm not running," I'd said, folding a sweater with trembling hands. "I'm choosing to live. Without your family, without me." I looked up at him then. This man who had once been my hero, who had taught me to ride a bike and change a tire and calculate tax percentages in my head. This man who had become a ghost after Mom died, who let Ellen whisper in his ear until he saw me through her eyes instead of his own. "You stopped seeing me years ago, Dad," I'd said. "I became invisible the day I made my first mistake." He'd left without another word. The next morning, I was gone before dawn broke. Now, a decade later, I drove through Mapleton's familiar streets. The town had shrunk somehow. The grand main street of my memory was just a short stretch of storefronts, half of them empty. Barton's Hardware, where Dad bought his first hammer as a young man, was now a vape shop. The ice cream parlor where he took us after swimming lessons had been replaced by a tax preparation office. I pulled into the driveway of what had been our family home, Ellen's home now. The maple tree in the front yard had grown massive, its leaves a blaze of red and gold. Dad used to measure our heights against its trunk each year on our birthdays, marking the dates with a carpenter's pencil. I wondered if those marks were still there, hidden under layers of bark. I didn't go inside. I couldn't bear to see Ellen moving through those rooms like she owned them. Because now, she did. Instead, I drove to Riverside Cemetery where they'd buried Dad next to Mom. Their headstones matched, simple granite, their names and dates carved in dignified letters. I knelt in the grass, still damp from morning dew, and placed my hand on the cold stone. "I'm sorry I wasn't here at the end," I whispered. "I'm sorry you died thinking I didn't care." The wind rustled through nearby trees, carrying the scent of approaching rain. I stayed there until my knees ached and my eyes dried, trying to feel some sense of closure that refused to come. Back at my hotel, the same Holiday Inn where we used to swim as kids when the power went out during summer storms, I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let myself cry. Not delicate tears, but ugly, wrenching sobs that left me gasping. My phone buzzed with a text from Meredith, my best friend in Boston, checking in. "How did it go?" "As expected," I replied. "Ellen got everything. I'm so sorry, Sarah. You deserved better." Did I, though? Hadn't I been the one to leave? Hadn't I been the one to miss birthdays and Christmases, to send cards that felt increasingly hollow, to make brief phone calls that dwindled into silence? But I'd had reasons. Good ones. When I was 17 and pregnant, Ellen, 19 and perfect, had stood in the doorway of my bedroom, watching me cry into my pillow. "You know what Mom and Dad are saying, don't they?" she'd said, arms crossed over her chest. "They're saying I was the smart one for waiting, for doing things right. After I lost the baby, a miscarriage at 10 weeks that left me hollow and bleeding." She brought me tea and sat on the edge of my bed. "Maybe it's for the best," she'd said, her voice gentle but her eyes calculating. "You weren't ready. You aren't like me." When Jason and I got married anyway, a small ceremony at the courthouse with just my parents as witnesses, Ellen didn't come. She sent a card that read, "Wishing you happiness in your choices," as though my marriage was a poor decision she couldn't endorse. And when Jason and I divorced 6 years later, after he'd gambled away our savings and slept with his coworker, Ellen had called, her voice dripping with something close to satisfaction. "You're always welcome to come home," she'd said. "Dad and I were just saying how that spare room could use someone in it, but it wouldn't have been coming home. It would have been surrender." So I stayed in Boston. I finished my degree at night while working days at a publishing company. I built a life that was modest, but mine. I sent money when Dad had his first heart attack 5 years ago. I called weekly, listening to his deteriorating health in the pauses between his words. I asked to visit, but there was always some reason why next month would be better. Now I knew why. Ellen had become his gatekeeper, controlling access like it was currency. The next morning, I checked out of the hotel and decided to make one final stop before heading to the airport. Mr. Peterson's law office wasn't officially open yet. It was barely 8, but his car was in the lot, and the light in his window glowed against the gray morning. I knocked tentatively, and he opened the door himself, surprise evident in the lift of his eyebrows. "Miss Connolly, I wasn't expecting to see you again." "I apologize for coming so early," I said. "I have a flight at noon and I wanted to ask you something." He gestured me inside, closing the door against the October chill. His office looked different without Ellen's triumphant presence filling it. Smaller, more worn. "What can I help you with?" he asked, motioning for me to sit. I perched on the edge of the same chair as yesterday, hands folded tightly in my lap. I was wondering if my father left anything for me. Not money or property. I rushed to clarify, seeing his expression shift. Just a letter, maybe. Something personal. Mr. Peterson's face changed then, a subtle softening around the eyes. He studied me for a long moment, then glanced at his watch. "Ellen said you were flying out this morning," he said quietly. "She knows my schedule better than I do, apparently." He nodded, as though coming to a decision, and opened his desk drawer. "Your father came to see me 3 months ago, when his health began to decline more rapidly. He was concerned about certain aspects of his will." My heart stuttered in my chest. "What do you mean?" "Ellen has been the executor of his estate for several years now. She helped manage his affairs after his second heart attack." He pulled out a sealed envelope, cream-colored and thick. "But your father had concerns about fairness." He slid the envelope across the desk. My name was written on the front in my father's hand, the same precise architectural lettering that had labeled my school lunchboxes and birthday gifts. I stared at it, afraid to touch it. "What is this?" "A codicil to his will," Mr. Peterson said. "A legal edition. He asked that it be presented after the primary will reading, and only if you came to ask about personal effects." He gestured to the envelope. "Which you have. Ellen doesn't know about this?" "No. Your father was explicit in his instructions." With trembling fingers, I picked up the envelope. It felt heavy, consequential. I broke the seal and pulled out several folded pages, my father's handwriting filling them from margin to margin. The first page began, "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, I've failed you in more ways than one." "Would you like some privacy?" Mr. Peterson asked softly. I nodded, unable to speak past the knot in my throat. As he slipped out of the office, closing the door behind him, I began to read the words my father had written in his final months. Words of explanation, of regret, of a love that had never diminished despite the distance between us. Words that would change everything. I thought I knew about the past 10 years, and at the end, a postscript that made my breath catch. "The lake house has always been yours, Sarah. It's the one thing I never let her touch. The lake house. The small, weather-beaten cabin on Lake Wilson where we'd spent summers when Ellen and I were children. Where Dad had taught me to fish and build fires. Where I'd written my first stories, curled in the window seat during thunderstorms. I thought Ellen had sold it years ago. She'd told me so, casually, during one of our brief phone conversations, but she had lied, and Dad had known. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Outside the office window, rain had begun to fall, gentle but persistent. Mapleton looked different through that watery lens, not smaller, as it had yesterday, but full of possibility, full of truth I hadn't known existed. Mr. Peterson knocked softly before re-entering. "Did you have any questions?" "Yes," I said, finding my voice steadier than I expected. "I need to change my flight, and then I need directions to Lake Wilson." He smiled then, a genuine smile that erased years from his face. "I was hoping you'd say that." While Mr. Peterson made calls to verify the property details, I sat with my father's letter in my lap, reading parts of it again. 10 pages of his thoughts, his regrets, his explanations for why he'd let Ellen control so much. "Your sister was always afraid, Sarah," he'd written. "Afraid of being unloved, afraid of losing control. After your mother died, that fear became something harder, something that changed her. I saw it happening, but I was too weak, too lost in my own grief to stop it. By the time I realized what she was doing, isolating me, turning me against you, it was already too late. You were gone. Gone, but not forgotten. never forgotten. I've watched you from afar, another passage read. Peterson has a friend in Boston who's kept an eye on you. Not spying, just making sure you were all right. I know about your promotion 3 years ago. I know you finished your degree. I know you volunteer at the Literacy Center on Thursdays. I've been proud of you every day, even when I couldn't say it. The rain had intensified by the time Mr. Peterson returned with a folder of documents and a set of keys, old brass ones, that looked familiar enough to make my throat tighten. The lake house hasn't been used much in recent years, he said, placing the keys in my palm. Your father would drive out there occasionally, usually on your birthday or Christmas. Ellen never knew. She thought he was visiting old fishing buddies. Is it habitable? I asked, closing my fingers around the cool metal. It needs work, but the structure is sound. Your father made sure of that. He had the roof replaced last summer and the plumbing updated. Mr. Peterson hesitated, then added, There's a box in the hall closet. He mentioned it specifically in his instructions to me, said you'd understand its importance. I nodded, though I had no idea what box he meant. The cabin had been filled with boxes, fishing tackle, old books, board games with missing pieces, but whatever this one contained, my father had thought it mattered. Ellen will fight this, I said, the reality of the situation settling over me. She'll say I manipulated him, or that he wasn't of sound mind. Let her try. Mr. Peterson's voice was firm. The codicil was properly witnessed and filed. Your father was perfectly lucid, more than lucid. He was determined. And besides, he added with a small smile, he left a video statement explaining his decision. It's quite thorough in addressing potential challenges. A video. My father, who had refused to even FaceTime with me in his final years, had recorded a video to protect my inheritance. Did he know how sick he was? I asked. The question that had haunted me since learning of his death. A massive stroke that took him in his sleep. At the end, Mr. Peterson's expression softened. Yes. The doctors gave him 6 months at most. He made it to 8. And he didn't call me. It wasn't a question. He tried, Mr. Peterson said gently. Several times. Ellen intercepted the calls, changed his cell phone number, told the hospital you were unreachable. He sighed heavily. By the time he confided in me, he was too weak to try again. That's when he created the codicil and recorded the video. The anger that bloomed in my chest was so sudden and fierce, it robbed me of breath. Ellen had stolen not just property or money, she had stolen my final moments with our father, my chance to say goodbye. Does she know about the video? I managed to ask. Not yet, but she will, if she contests the codicil. He hesitated. Do you want to see it now? I shook my head. I need to see the lake house first, to understand what he was protecting. An hour later, I turned my rental car onto the narrow dirt road that led to Lake Wilson. The rain had subsided to a misty drizzle that softened the edges of the pines lining the way. 10 years fell away as familiar landmarks appeared. The crooked oak we called the wishing tree, the rusted mailbox with Connolly painted in fading white letters, the wooden bridge over Cooper's Creek that still rattled when cars passed over it. And then the cabin came into view through the trees. Smaller than in my memory, its dark green paint weathered in places, but unmistakably still standing. Still waiting. I parked and sat for a moment, gathering courage. This place had been our sanctuary once. Mine and Dad's especially. Mom had preferred the house in town, and Ellen had always complained about the mosquitoes, the lack of cell service, the rustic plumbing. But Dad and I had loved everything about it. The creaking floorboards that sang their own music, the stone fireplace that warmed the entire main room, the porch swing where we'd watched meteor showers and shared secrets. The key slid into the lock with a familiar resistance, requiring the slight upward pressure I remembered from childhood. The door swung open with a groan of welcome. Inside, time had stood still. The same plaid couch sat facing the fireplace, though the cushions looked recently recovered. The bookshelf still held our old collection: adventure novels, field guides to local wildlife, my mother's beloved poetry anthologies. The kitchen table, scarred from countless craft projects and card games, gleamed with a fresh coat of varnish. But what caught my eye were the photographs. They lined the mantel, filled the walls, a visual timeline of our family. And unlike at the house in town, where Ellen had gradually replaced family photos with formal portraits of herself and Dad, these showed all of us. Mom reading on the porch swing, Ellen and me swimming in the lake, our faces bright with childhood joy. Dad teaching me to bait a hook, his patience evident even in a frozen image. And there were newer ones. Me at my college graduation, a ceremony Dad had said he couldn't attend due to his health. Me receiving an award at work, clipped from the company newsletter I'd mailed them years ago. Me volunteering at a beach cleanup, a photo I'd posted on social media, but never expected them to see. He had been watching. All this time, he had been keeping track of my life, creating this alternate history where I remained part of the family. I moved through the cabin in a daze, touching familiar objects. The cuckoo clock that had never kept proper time, the hand-carved chess set missing one black bishop, the quilt my grandmother had made for my 16th birthday. In the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed quietly, and when I opened it, I found it stocked with basics: milk, eggs, butter, orange juice. Not old items, but fresh ones. Someone had been here recently. Mr. Peterson, probably, preparing for the possibility that I might come. Upstairs, my old bedroom was unchanged. The twin bed with its blue sailboat quilt. The bookshelf filled with my childhood favorites. The pine desk where I'd written endless summer journal entries. A thin layer of dust covered everything, but it felt preserved rather than abandoned. I returned downstairs and remembered Mr. Peterson's words about a box in the hall closet. The closet was packed with the usual cabin supplies: life jackets, fishing gear, board games, extra blankets. But behind an old rain poncho, I found something that hadn't been there before: a large metal lockbox, the kind used for important documents. I carried it to the kitchen table, heart pounding. It wasn't locked. Inside, neatly organized, I found manila folders labeled with years, one for each year I'd been away. I opened the most recent one: bank statements, tax returns, property assessments, accounting records for my father's construction business. As I flipped through them, a pattern emerged, a pattern of systematic financial manipulation. Ellen had been methodically transferring assets into her name for years. The business had been profitable, far more profitable than Dad had let on during our phone calls when he'd mentioned being a little tight this month. There were letters from medical providers, treatments Ellen had scheduled for Dad, then canceled. Specialists he should have seen, medications he should have taken, explanations for why his health had declined so rapidly. And there was a journal, Dad's careful handwriting detailing his growing awareness of Ellen's control, his failed attempts to reach me, his determination to protect what little he could still claim as his own. "The lake house is all I have left. That's truly mine," one entry read. "Ellen thinks it's worthless, too remote, too small, too much work. She doesn't know I've been transferring funds here for years, building a safety net. She doesn't know about the trust. She doesn't know this. Will be Sarah's lifeline when I'm gone. Trust? What trust?" As if in answer, the final folder contained trust documents, a separate legal entity my father had established 3 years ago, with the lake house property as its primary asset. But the trust contained more than just the cabin. There were investment, accounts, a life insurance policy, and mineral rights to land in western Pennsylvania that had been in our family for generations. Ellen hadn't stolen everything after all. She'd only taken what she could see. The total value was substantial. Not a fortune, but enough to change my life completely. Enough to quit my job and write the novel I'd been outlining for years. Enough to start over on my own terms. With the document spread before me, I felt a curious lightness. Not joy. It was too soon for that. Not vindication. This wasn't about proving Ellen wrong. It was something quieter and more profound. Recognition. My father had seen me, even when I thought his eyes were closed. The rain had stopped completely by the time my phone rang, the screen displaying a number I didn't recognize. Sarah Connolly? A woman's voice asked when I answered. Yes? This is Diana Marsh from Mapleton Community Bank. I'm trying to reach you regarding some unusual activity on your father's accounts. My pulse quickened. What kind of activity? Multiple large withdrawals initiated this morning by Ellen Connolly. Our system flagged them because they exceed the limits your father established. She paused. And because Mr. Peterson called us about the codicil to your father's will. Ellen was moving fast. She must have suspected something. What happens now? I asked. We've temporarily frozen the accounts pending legal review. Ms. Marsh hesitated. Your sister is quite insistent that the bank release the funds immediately. I'm sure she is, I said, a strange calm settling over me. Please tell her that I'll see her at the bank tomorrow morning. Mr. Peterson will join us. She's actually here now, the banker said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. And she's demanding to know where you are. I looked around the cabin, at the photographs, the memories, the evidence of my father's quiet rebellion against Ellen's control. Tell her, I said simply. Tell her I'm at the lake house, and I'm not leaving. The line went silent for a moment. Then, she's on her way to you. Should I call someone? The sheriff, maybe? No, I said. This conversation is long overdue. After hanging up, I went to the porch and sat on the steps, watching the mist rise from the lake as the late afternoon sun broke through the clouds. The surface of the water shimmered like hammered silver, catching light and throwing it back in fragments. Dad and I used to sit here for hours, not talking, just being. I wasn't afraid of Ellen anymore. The power she had held over me existed, only in my mind, in my guilt over leaving, in my belief that I had abandoned our father. But his letter, his photographs, his secret trust, they told a different story. A story where I had been loved continuously, even in absence. A story where my father had found his courage too late to speak it aloud, but not too late to write it into law. I heard her car before I saw it. The aggressive growl of an engine pushed too hard on the narrow dirt road. She careened into the clearing and slammed to a stop behind my rental. The door flew open, and Ellen emerged like a fury, still dressed in the elegant black suit she'd worn to the lawyer's office, now rumpled from driving. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she demanded, stalking toward me, heels sinking into the soft earth. "Breaking into private property? I could have you arrested." I didn't stand. I didn't need to. "Hello, Ellen. It's not breaking in when you have a key, and it's not private property, it's mine." She stopped short, her face flushing with anger. "Don't be ridiculous. Everything of Dad's is mine now. You were there for the will reading." "I was," I agreed, meeting her gaze steadily. "But I missed the part where Dad left a codicil, a legal addition to his will, leaving the lake house, and everything associated with it, to me." "You're lying." But uncertainty had crept into her voice. "Mr. Peterson has the paperwork, and a video statement from Dad explaining his decision." I gestured to the space beside me on the steps. "Would you like to sit down? We have a lot to talk about." "I'm not sitting anywhere with you," she snapped, but she didn't leave. Her eyes darted past me to the open cabin door, as though trying to see what I might have discovered inside. "Whatever you think you found, it won't hold up. Dad wasn't himself in those final months. He was confused, medicated. He was clear enough to document your financial manipulations, I said quietly. Clear enough to create a trust you knew nothing about. Clear enough to record testimony about how you isolated him and controlled his medical care. The color drained from her face. That's absurd. I took care of him. I was there every day while you were off living your life in Boston. Yes, you were physically present, but did you ever really see him, Ellen? Did you see how lonely he was? How he missed Mom? How he missed me? He didn't miss you, she said, but her voice had lost its edge. He never talked about you. Not to you, maybe. I stood finally and walked to my car. From the passenger seat, I retrieved Dad's letter, still in its envelope. He wrote me this. 10 pages about how much he regretted letting you come between us. 10 pages of love and apology and hope that someday I'd find my way back here. Ellen stared at the envelope in my hand, then back at my face. Something shifted in her expression, the hard shell of superiority cracking just enough to reveal a glimpse of the sister I'd once known. The one who had held my hand on the first day of school. The one who had taught me to French braid my hair. You left, she said, and for the first time in years, I heard the pain beneath her anger. You left us both. I left because staying meant disappearing, I said gently. You had already decided who I was. The failure, the disappointment, the cautionary tale. There was no space for me to be anything else. That's not true, she protested, but weakly. It is true, Ellen. You needed me to be wrong so you could be right. You needed Dad to choose you over me. He did choose me. But she wouldn't meet my eyes now. No, I said softly. He loved us both, but you wouldn't share him, so you made sure he couldn't reach me. You made sure I wouldn't come back. She was silent for a long moment, her arms wrapped around herself as though against a chill only she could feel. Then, the bank called me. The accounts are frozen. I know. I need that money, Sarah. Her voice had changed, stripped of its usual authority. I have debts. The house needs repairs. The business hasn't been profitable for years. I studied my sister, really looked at her. The designer suit couldn't hide how thin she'd become. The careful makeup didn't disguise the exhaustion etched around her eyes. She'd spent a decade creating an illusion of success, of control, and now it was crumbling around her. What happened to the money, Ellen? Dad's business was doing well. I've seen the books. She looked away, toward the lake where the last light of day was fading. I made some bad investments, tried to expand too quickly. Then the recession hit, and... She trailed off, then added in a whisper, I couldn't let him know I'd failed. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I'd been building my life block by careful block, Ellen had been desperately trying to maintain the facade of the golden child, the daughter who never made mistakes. We can figure this out, I said, surprising myself with the words. There's enough in the trust to save the business, maybe even the house. She looked at me sharply. Why would you help me? After everything? Because you're my sister, I said simply. And because Dad would want us to find our way back to each other. I don't know how to do that, she admitted. And for a moment, she looked very young, almost like the girl who had taught me to ride a bike when Dad was too busy with work. We can start here, I said, gesturing to the cabin behind me. This place always brought out the best in us. Ellen glanced at the porch, at the swing where we had once read books side by side, and I saw something soften in her face. Just a flicker, but enough. I should go, she said abruptly, turning back toward her car. We're meeting with Mr. Peterson tomorrow, I called after her. 10 o'clock. The trust has provisions for both of us, Ellen. Dad made sure of it. She paused, her back to me. You've always been so certain about everything. Not certain, I corrected gently. Just willing to start over when I'm wrong. She didn't respond to that, just continued to her car and slid behind the wheel. But she didn't immediately drive away. She sat there for several minutes, staring at the cabin as though seeing it, truly seeing it, for the first time in years. When she finally left, the tires on her expensive car moved slowly over the dirt road, no longer in a hurry to escape. I returned to the porch and sat in the gathering twilight, listening to the familiar sounds of the lake at dusk. Frogs beginning, their nightly chorus, fish jumping for insects, the soft lapping of water against the shore. Above me, the first stars appeared, pinpricks of light in the deepening blue. Later, I would read the rest of Dad's letters. Later, I would fully understand the weight of what he had left me. Not just property or money, but truth. The truth that I had never been forgotten, never been unloved, even when distance and silence suggested otherwise. For now, it was enough to be here, in this place that had always felt like home. To know that I had not imagined the love that once filled these rooms, to believe that perhaps some part of it remained, waiting to be rediscovered. I thought about Ellen's face as she drove away. Not triumphant, not defeated, but something in between. Something that looked almost like recognition. Perhaps for her, too, the truth was only beginning to emerge from years of carefully constructed fiction. Inside the cabin, I found an old quilt and wrapped it around my shoulders before settling into the porch swing. The chain creaked rhythmically as I pushed against the floorboards with one foot, the sound as familiar as my own heartbeat. In the morning, there would be meetings and papers to sign, truths to face and decisions to make. But tonight, I simply existed in the space my father had protected for me, surrounded by evidence of his quiet, persistent love. Not all inheritances can be measured in dollars and deeds. Some come in moments of clarity, in recognitions long delayed. Some arrive in the form of courage. The courage to face what was lost, to claim what remains, to begin again with open hands and honest eyes. As darkness settled completely over the lake, I whispered a thank you to the night, to my father, to the past, to whatever future might now be possible. The stars reflected on the water's surface, a mirror of possibility, broken only by the occasional ripple of a fish seeking its way home through the dark.